is going to share some of the research she's done and stories about her family, and she's also going to share some tips, some information about genealogy, because she's done an extensive amount of research of her people and other people's families in this area. And then we also have Michael Rather, who's driven in all the way from Texas. He's got some wonderful poems to share with you, and so that'll happen this evening. And then you never know what's going to happen during the open mic, so that's always up for grabs. But first, I'd like to introduce Marie. I met Marie, by the way, because I was interested in history, and she seemed to have a lot of information, and so I wanted to know what she knew. Okay, I wanted to learn from her. She, over 30 years ago, Marie Marcel of Leonville had many questions about her grandmother. No one even knew her grandmother's name. In her search to learn more, she also found a great love for genealogy. She has researched families in the area for many years. She will discuss her journey into family research and will share methods on how to research your family. But first, she's going to start out with her own story. Please help me welcome Marie Marcel.
Now, how y'all do today? Y'all do good today? Well, I see y'all come to hear my little granddaughter tell my story. I never knew my little granddaughter, and I'm sure she's going to do okay telling my story. She may not have too much to say, but kind of listen to what she got to say. We don't know. But it's so good. And I hope it don't rain so some other people can come to hear my story. Okay, I'm Marie Marcel, and I'm going to share with you about my grandmother, that no one ever knew her name. How it all started was that I was doing another project, and my oldest sister at the time, whenever I would come to Opelousas or Leonville, she would always talk about my grandmother. So I said, what about Grandma? And she said, Grandma was a good lady, and Grandma would babysit us, she would say. But she said, well, then they didn't say babysit, they said she would keep us. And she said, we would always stay at Grandma's house. And I said, okay. And so I said, well, tell me what Grandma was like. And she said, she could cook and she could sew. And she said, she taught my mom how to cook and sew. Well, my mom was my mother. And she said, so I said, well, did you all live with Grandma? She said, oh, yeah. Most of the times we lived with Grandma. She said Grandma had made sure all of her grandchildren lived with her. So I said, well, how far away did you all live? And she said, right across the road. But she said everybody wanted to go to Grandma's house. So I said, well, was there any other kids at Grandma's house? She said, yeah, Cousin Amy and Cousin Agnes, and she said, and Cousin T-Cat. Well, those were our first cousins. And she said their mother and father had separated. So when the mother left, my grandmother said the children had to stay with her. So they did. So she said we would always go over there. So I said, okay. So then I started asking the other brothers and sisters about our grandmother. So I would ask one brother, and I said, no, another sister first. I said, well, tell me about Grandma. She said, oh, girl, Grandma was the lady. I said, wow, that was a heck of a lady, you know what I'm saying? Because everybody wanted to talk about her. So I said, well, what was Grandma's name? Oh, I don't know. You don't know? No, we didn't know Grandma's name. So I said, well, what did y'all call her? Oh, we would call her Grandma or Mimette. I said, Grandma or Mimette. Yeah. So I said, okay. So then I asked another sister. So I said, tell me about Grandma. Oh, Grandma, she was Grandma would cook, and she'd make us tea cakes and pies, and let me tell you, Grandma knew how to cook grits. I said, well, cook grits? So what was so special about cooking grits? She said she had those little round cake pans, and she would mix the grits, and she would put them in a cake pan. I said, and she would bake it? She said, no, she just let it sit out and it would get hard. Then I said, well, what y'all would do, eat hard grits? She said, no, it'd be just like the grits you cook, but the only thing, we had to slice the grits. I said, sliced? She said, like you slice a pie. I said, I ain't never heard of no sliced grits. She said, well, you just did. I just told you what Grandma did. So then I said, okay. So I said, well, you didn't know anything else? No. So I asked a brother. So I asked him, I said, well, what do you remember about Grandma? Oh, Grandma. And I said, well, something's wrong with this. Everybody knows about Grandma, but they don't know her name. And they all had the same smile on their face whenever I would ask about Grandma. So then I said, well, I got one other person I'm going to ask. That's the oldest one in the family. So I asked him, and he said, I said, tell me about Mama or Grandma. Oh, let me tell you about Mama, let me tell you about Grandma. Well, I'm ready now because he's got the story. He's the oldest in the family. So I asked him, and he said, well, Grandma would bake all the time. And let me tell you, Grandma had 2 sisters. And he said they were some praying sisters. He said the rosary beads had a song to it. That's all they did all day long was pray. And I said, really? He said, yes. And he said, every morning at 6 o'clock, they would walk to the church because the Mass started at 7. So I said, well, why do they leave so early? And it ain't but 3 steps in there at the church. They just want to go in there and say the rosary before everybody starts coming in for Mass. So I said, well, okay. He said, oh, let me tell you, they'd be walking down the gravel road. He said, and Grandma's sisters, their balance were off. He said, when you look up, they'd be walking all up in the ditch. They'd come back up on the road and walk. So I said, well, what do you mean that balance was off? He said, well, when the balance off, you can't walk straight. You can't do this thing straight. I said, okay. So I said, and when their balance would go off, what happened? He said, Grandma would be walking down the highway. They'd be behind her. He said, when you look, one going up in the ditch, the other one coming up out of the ditch, back and forth, back and forth. So I said, well, Grandma didn't have that problem. He said, no, Grandma didn't have that problem. So I said, okay. So then I said, I want to know more. He said, well, I tell you what. He said, Grandma taught us how to read and write. I said, Grandma taught y'all how to read and write? Well, how old was she? He said, oh, she was an old lady. I said, okay, describe her. What did she look like? He said she was real tall and real slender. He said, but her sisters were short. They wasn't too very tall. And he said, but Grandma, she always made sure before we went to school in the morning, we had biscuits and milk or biscuits and syrup or whatever was there. And he said after school, we'd get home, she would have us some kind of little snack. It was nothing but a piece of cornbread or something. And she would say, well, listen, go on and eat, and then we'll eat your little snack, then we're going to do homework, and after the homework, then you'll eat supper. So he said that's what they did. So I said, well, who all was over there? He said, oh, God, everybody. He said, all of us, all Mama's children, and then he said, Cousin Agnes and Cousin Amy, and they would all be there. And I said, who else? He said, Aunt Lucille and them. And I said, well, why would Aunt Lucille and them be there? He said, because those were her nieces. I was confused. How could they be her nieces? And they are my mother's first cousins. So I said, well, that's why we called them Aunt Lucille. And he said, yes, because that was Papa's aunt, but that was Mama's first cousins. They were Papa's aunt and Mama's first cousins, okay? So then I started interviewing those family members. So I asked them to tell me what Grandma was like. And they did. They said that Grandma she was a very, very smart lady. And they said everybody in the neighborhood would gather at my grandmother's house because she would help them with homework. And I said, okay. And then started saying, well, then the other cousins would come over, and then they would come over because they want to learn how to read and write. So I said, where did y'all go to school? And they said, we had the little red schoolhouse building. What's the name of it? She said, oh, I didn't know. I said, you don't know? She said, no. So I said, well, what about the Catholic school? She said, well, that came way afterwards. They opened the little Catholic school, but she said Grandma still helped us with our homework. So I said, okay. So then it went on, and I kept saying, I want to know more about my grandmother. I want to know more about her name. What was her people? And so they still didn't know. So I said, okay, Grandpa Paul, was that Grandma's husband? Yes. I said, not a problem. So I decided I would get my brother to take me to the courthouse to research a marriage. When I saw my grandfather's name, I said, oh, my grandmother, I'm going to learn her name today. When I flipped open that big book, because I looked through the index, when I looked at the marriage license, I saw my grandmother's name. I cried. I think I flooded out that basement at the courthouse once I found out my grandmother's name, because then I realized she was actually a live person. She was somebody. So then I cried, and Keith, I'll never forget, Keith Fontenot said, well, why are you crying? And I said, I never knew my grandmother. She died before I was born, and my brothers and sisters want to know what was my grandmother's name. He said, well, what happened? I said, I just found out her name. He said, okay, well now let's find out her mama and daddy's name. I'm like, her mama and daddy's name? He said, yeah, so we looked that up. Of course, they had got married Catholic, so he showed me the Father Hebert books, how to, look it up in the Father Hebert records. And I said, well, who's Father Hebert? He explained that to me. So once I saw my great-grandparents' name, that was another story. I didn't know what to say. I cried so much because I realized that I had a grandmother that I never knew anything about. Then I'm learning more about who her parents were. And then from there, I learned who their parents were. So that brought me back to the late 1700s on knowing my great-great-grandparents. I'm like, I don't believe this. So he said, now, what about the other side? And I said, what do you mean the other side? He said, what about your grandfather? I said, well, I want to know more about his side, too. So my grandfather's side, Keith helped me out with that, took me all the way back to, again, the late 1700s. I was through for the day. I just wanted to get home to tell my brother that I had found out what my grandmother's name was. And so I could not wait. He picked me up late that evening, and I couldn't wait to get in the car to tell him that I had found out our grandparents' name and how far back I had gone with that, with the research. So he was very excited. He started calling everybody to tell everybody, well, Marie found out Grandma's name, And so I didn't tell him Grandma's name. So he asked me, he was on the phone with one of my sisters, and he said, oh, Marie, what is Grandma's name? And I said her name was Potina Alcindor. He said, Alcindor, where that name comes from? I said, well, I don't know. I've got to continue to research, and I'll tell you where it comes from. So that's how I got into doing the research on my grandmother's side, which was my dad. That was the one I really wanted to know about. But in the midst of that, I learned about the grandmother on my mother's side. I never heard about grandmothers. So the next day I go and I looked up my grandfather's name, my mother's father, because I knew him, because he died when I was about the age of 12. So I looked up his marriage and I saw his wife's name, so that was another story. And they were actually from this area, the Blackwells and the Hardys, the LaMelle Blackwells and Hardys from this area. That's on my mother's side. So it's been a real great journey through my genealogy research. And once I found out the grandmother that I was actually looking for, within 6 months, I had almost connected the entire community based on my grandmother. And that was so exciting, because then I realized a lot of the kids that I had gone to school with, we were relatives. But I did not know we were relatives, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, and my dad was one of these, he visited everybody, And I was his trail. I mean, I was in his footsteps. And he had a pickup truck, and I would always lean on the dashboard because I was a little girl, and I'd look up at him, and I said, now, whose house is this? And he said, oh, this is cousin so-and-so. Then we would stop, and he said, that's Taunt so-and-so. I'm like, I don't know who these people are. But I couldn't have been there about 6, 7 years old. But later on, I found out their names. And boy, from that day forward, it's 30 years, I'm still on that journey. I'm still on that journey, and it's been a wonderful journey. And from that, I've traveled all over the United States by Greyhound bus, locating families. Once I started locating families, and I would call them and I would tell them about my research, and they say, well, when are you coming? I said, oh, in about another couple of weeks. Oh, no, baby, you got to come now because I'm 80 years old and I want to know this before I die. So it was a journey on that Greyhound bus. I mean, it was so good that I had a buddy pass on the Greyhound bus because I had put so many mileages, traveling. And then from there, I started going to different archives. New Orleans, I know about every archive in New Orleans, Louisiana State Archive in Baton Rouge. And then by the mid-90s, I found out, I had gone to a family reunion on my dad's side, and I found out there was a picture of a cousin, had a picture of this man with a pistol and a uniform. And so the cousin said, oh, by the way, this is our great-great-grandfather. I said, oh, great-great-grandfather? He said, yeah. He said, that's my grandmother and your grandfather on your dad's side, that's their dad. I said, oh my God, now where did he get this picture from? He said that picture's been in the family since the 1863, 64. And he wanted to share it with me. Well, then I'm on another journey. I got to find out who this man is with a uniform. So I knew some of the Buffalo soldiers in Houston, so I taken the picture back to Houston with me, and I asked this old Mr. Powell, I'll never forget this man, could he help me identify this soldier? He said, oh, yeah, that's the U.S. colored troop. Now I'm confused. The U.S. colored troops. So he went on to tell me the story about the U.S. colored troop, about the war, the Civil War. Okay, the Civil War. I never heard of U.S. colored troops in the Civil War. In school, all I heard was about the Confederates. I didn't know anything else. So Mr. Powell really took me by the hand and walked me through it. So he said to me, go to Clayton Library, there's a pension file index. Research the pension file index. Well, now, here we go. So he decided he would take me himself to the library to show me about the pension file, how to research the pension files, and I did. God, did I see this man's name. So my next trip, right, I'm on my way to Washington, D.C., because that's the only place that you can, obtain these files. So I'm heading to Washington, D.C. 1 week later. My plan was to be there for 1 week. I was there for 2 weeks. Because when you start researching those pension files, what happens is there are other referrals. So you go from that one to another. And then before you know it, you've got a stack of files. So I did that. I learned a lot. One of the pension files, had it not been for that pension file, I probably would have been still looking for one of the great-great-grandmother, which would have been my grandmother that I'm inquiring about. What happened to her mother? Well, just so happened in that pension file was her mother's name. Here we go. All this good luck is coming now. I'm like, oh my God. So looking for that grandmother name, I hit a brick wall. I don't know who her parents are. But on the men's side, it's easy to trace on the men's side because of the names. But on the women's side, it's not that easy because the women being slaves, they only had a single name. For some reason or another, they just took on somebody else's last name. Or when they got married, they took on the husband's name. So here we are, And even with the men, some of the men had a single name. But what happened was the father with the single name gave the children his single name as their surname. That's just like Marcel. We're the only Marcels. Because of the great-great-grandfather had his single name was Marcel. But he gave my great-great-grandfather his single name as our surname. So that's how we're Marcells. But the wife, there's no name at all. I can't trace her no more than right then when they got married. And the name that she did use was a master's name, which it took me 5 years to realize that was not her name after I kept coming across the big wall. But it's been an interesting journey, researching the family and coming from a small knitted community. And in that community, continue to do research. Then I found out the masters, the people that owned my dad's side of the family, was really my mother's side of the family. So here we goes again. So that's another interesting journey, but that's for a later date, because I'll be on that for the next 20 years. But it's interesting with the genealogy, what you can find, and I know Etha can contest to that because she's done it herself and been very successful with tracing her family. But it's an addiction, trust me. It is an addiction. It's an addiction because once I started, I did not sleep for days and nights. I was up all day, all night, drinking coffee. Sometimes I'd say, is it day or is it night? But it's interesting. And I'm hoping that you all would do the same. If you need help with that, I'd be more than happy to help you with your research. If you have not started, and if you've started and you've come across a brick wall and you need to go over that brick wall, we'll work together. I will do anything humanly possible to help you with that. And but pick up, just start. Your Catholic is easy. Not all that easy, but it's easier because the Catholics kept really good records. I mean, really good records. They can take you back to Spain if you want to get back to Spain. Just knowing the names. So it's very helpful. But I cherish every bit of it. And Father Hebert is gone today, but I learned a lot about him and about his books and also the Catholic Church. I mean, my heart goes out to the Catholic Church. I try to support as much as I can because those are our bookkeepers, But it's interesting. It's really, really interesting. So, well, my little granddaughter, she found out what my name was. Now I find out what my little granddaughter's name. She knows my name and I know her name. So, thank y'all for coming out. Hoping she did a good job. I'm sorry.
In doing your research, you were able to find what family owned your ancestors, because a lot of times if you can find the people, the whites who owned them, sometimes they kept records. These plantation owners kept records of the slaves they had. And like you say, only first names in some cases, but at least you have some kind of documentation, because they did keep records. The plantation owners had records of the slaves, all first names, but at least you have a copy of it.
Yeah.
And if they're willing to let you copy it, depending on who the plantation owners were, if they were even still in existence. But some of the family members, somebody has those records. I know the Scott family, the lady turned in a lot of records to the LSU Special Papers Library. We went there and found a lot of the Scotts. And I'm still working on it because the Scotts had a plantation around Brancato. And I'm still trying to find out exactly where it was. And want to contact some Scotts in the area, the Brancato Perico area. So you were able to find out what the family owned?
Yes, I was. Interesting. How I was able to really find it through the marriage. In the Father Hebert books, it stated who the masters were. So then that was much easier because, for instance, I'm going to go to the Marcel man. The Marcel man was once owned by Robin. And Robin sold him to Donata family. The Donatas and the Millions.
That's a huge plantation.
Yes.
Lopez owned a lot of
Right.
slaves.
Well, what happened was he had passed away, but his wife had possession. So she started selling off her slaves. And by that time, the free people had come into the Leonville area. So they started purchasing those slaves at estate sales or whatever. So that's how we became part of the Leonville, because of the free people. So we were fortunate enough to be owned by free people of color. And the free people of color kept very good records. I mean, very, very good records along with the church. And I'm going to go back to Conrad Ozanne that did the manuscript on the 5 free people of Leonville. And in his book, in the inventory, he gave all of the slaves' names, single names. They are my slaves in the manuscript. But prior to then, in Houston, we have the University of Houston Library. They have an archive. And at that time, when computers first became very popular, they had tons and tons of computers there. They had probably 500 just for the general public, and for students there might have been a couple of thousand. So open to the public, we were able to go in and do research. And just so happened, today I don't quite remember how did I get to this site and found out about the library at LSU. I took a journey there. Once I got there, I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew they had slave inventories there. That's where I found my Marcel man. I happened to just, out of the clear blue, I just happened to pull out this catalog, the drawer, and in it I saw Jean-Baptiste Million. When I saw that, I said, oh my God, Jean-Baptiste Million. When I pulled it out, and then I requested the file, that's when I find all these receipts, whereas this Marcel man had been well taken care of, very well taken care of. They had receipts where they were paying doctors to pay him a visit. Now, we're talking about in 1823. And from there was other records pertaining to Leonville. So that was a great help right there. So,
Yeah, if you can find a family who owned them,
yes.
these people kept records.
They did.
That's great.
Yeah, and in the pension files also, in those pension files, once those guys were mustered from the war, and when they applied for their pension, they named their owners. They named the owners and the different transfers of owners, and they also named, for instance, how many children they had, the age of the children. So that was a great help.
Marcel, let's give her one more hand. We're gonna take a short break, and if you wanted to personally ask her some more questions, you're welcome to. We can take a short break, and then in a moment we're gonna come back with some poetry. The open mic nobody signed up yet, so if you wanted your opportunity, jump on it. Also, we're going to go ahead and start again. We're going to start again. What I think I'm going to do, I'm going to put the open mic in the middle, and then we're going to move on, and then I'll introduce Michael. And so for the open mic, I have one person who's signed up, and that's my friend, the poet Liz Burke. So she's going to come read a couple poems. Please give a hand for Liz.
Thank you. I have allergies, so if I croak my way through this, please excuse me. This is from a book, Learning to Love Louisiana, and just a word of backstory. I'm a Yankee from New York, and I married a Cajun, and so I'm down here in Louisiana a lot, and This book is full of poems about trying to get used to Louisiana. It's very different than up north. And the poem I'm reading is about visiting my husband's mother at a nursing home.
Can you get a little closer to the mic, please?
Can you hear me now? Oh, sorry, okay. Did you hear me before?
I heard you.
Okay. Mornings at Maison du Monde. By 6:30 a.m., the dining room buzzes with low-key commotion under fluorescent lights. The staff moving slow, delivering breakfast plate by plate, a bowl of cornflakes, fried eggs, grits, a strip of bacon, to residents arranged at designated tables in varied states of dress and undress. Pajama top over sweatpants, a crisp shirt neatly tucked into belted trousers, a feathered hat perched atop gray wisps. Some manage their own utensils. Others are spoon-fed by staff or family members who coax food through lax lips or mouths set in stone. Gossip is rampant among those who still speak. You see that woman at the next table, the fat one? She a mean lady. She was my sister-in-law. Now she my ex because my husband's dead. The two lively ladies at our table smile, call us share, entertain with stories of last night's food fight. Miss Annie over there hurling a plate of mashed potatoes at a semi-blind hunchback who last evening had brazenly taken her seat in the dining room. Miss Olita, and that's my mother-in-law, dressed in peach pullover, wheelchair tucked under table, tubes dangling from her nose, is having none of it. Weary from wheezing her way through the night, she barely looks up as my white-haired husband tries to feed her. Mama, have some coffee, a bite of egg, c'est bon. Nothing interests her, not even the visitors who arrive in late afternoon with freshly baked persimmon bread, homemade fudge, pear clafoutis, treats she used to make for them, her children, who have placed her here, who hope to wheedle a smile by letting her win a game of dominoes after dinner.
I work in a nursing home, and it's so sure it's true. I'm the activities director. We have one little lady, she said, Shaq, come see. You see that lady over there? She went to Pineville? Yeah. Everybody over there. The young employee said, what's that Pineville? What is that? She said, I'll explain.
All right, let's give one more hand. Let's give one more hand for Luz Fur. I just wanted to mention to you that next month, the last Wednesday of the month, I'm not sure of the exact date of that, but one of our guests is going to be the poet, former poet laureate of Louisiana, Darrell Bork. He's going to be really wonderful. And also Ms. Bernice Murray, who's sitting right here. She's going to come tell some stories for us to her. She said she's just going to talk. But she said she does what a lot of people do to me, is they say, well, I don't really have any stories, and then they start to tell a story. And so I know you do, so I thank you for that. I'm going to tell just a little story, which is not something I do very often, but I felt like it tonight. And then in a moment we'll hear the group poem, and then we'll hear from Michael Rather. But Olin and I, we like to go to open mics around the area because we like to check out other people, what they put on, how they do it. Everybody has their own spin on these kinds of events. So we read about one going on in Lake Charles at a place called Stellar Beans. And so we thought, yeah, let's go to that. Nolan has a brother there, and we would meet there at the coffee shop and have coffee and muffins or whatever. So we drove to Lake Charles for this open mic. There was an open mic and there was a slam, but we wanted to get early so we could make sure that we were part of the open mic. So we got there, nobody's there yet. We're the first ones to arrive. And then people start coming in, and then this young man named Michael Rather is there, and he's the organizer of the event. And we said, well, we want to be on the open mic. And he signed us up, but it wasn't really clear whether we were on the open mic or the slam. But he called it a bash because he thought that was nicer than slam. It was kinder because he's a kind person. and so he called it a bash. But anyway, and there were belly dancers too, and there was a drummer, and it turned out 3 people signed up to read. Olin signed up, and he had a poem by someone else, but since he inadvertently ended up we all ended up on the list to participate in the slam, but we didn't actually know that until that moment came. So Olin had to find his own poem. So he remembered a poem that he'd written a long time ago. So Olin performed his poem, and I performed my poem. And then there was a young man named Autumn, and he performed his poem. We were the only 3 people in it. Normally in a slam, you have 5 people in the audience who hold up cards with number 1 through 10, and they to evaluate the quality of the performance, And so after you read, people hold up these numbers. But since it was a small group, only 3 people held up numbers, and I think one of them was a belly dancer who I think had a crush on Olin, which I think kind of unfair to lean things in his direction. So, and then there was a break because we had our session, and then you take a break. I don't know if there were 2 or there were 3 rounds, and in between the plump belly dancers were dancing and the drummer was drumming, and it was really very exciting. And then in the end, finally, we had our 3 rounds, and Autumn, he came in first, okay, and by the way, I've written a lot of poems. I had my big old notebook full of poems, and then Olin, he's been writing poems a while. Well, Olin came in second, and I came in third, but there were only 3 spots, okay. But we all got gift certificates, which was really nice, by the way, to restaurants in the area. And so now it's been several years. It's probably been 4, 5, 6 years since then. And so now, like this morning, Olin scrambled eggs for breakfast for me and said, "Here's your breakfast, honey. Hey, do you remember that slam when I beat you?" So it comes up periodically. Thank you, Michael. So it still comes up periodically years later. So I just wanted to share that experience with you. Next, I wanted to invite, I had forgotten your name. Can you? Jean. Jean's going to come and read the group poem where everyone's participated with feeling. All right, thank you.
We participated with feeling, or I'm going to read it with feeling? Whichever. So if I mispronounce something that you wrote, it's not because you have bad handwriting. It's just that I couldn't read it good or whatever. So I'll do my best. I am 7. I am 7, and I am a sassy little girl. I am 7, and I am in the bushes striking matches, lighting flowers made of styrofoam. I am 7, and I am the slow melt of the styrofoam making more black mud. I am 7 and looking toward 11. I am 7 and I am crawfishing. I am 7 and I am playing hopscotch. I am 7 and playing stickball in the streets. Crash, tinkle of glass, we break a window and run like hell. I am 7 and my dog and I are jumping through the framing of a new house. I am 7 and my big sister is 9. My brother is only 6 and my little sisters are 4 and 2. But 7 is just fine with me. I am 7 and looking out the car window for red dirt, which means we are close to Grandma's. I am 7 and almost burned the house down. I am 7 and very afraid to go to school because we had some mean nuns. One was Sister Carmel. The end.
And thanks to you for your contributions. That worked out very nicely. We're pretty good, you know. So that was very fine. And now our featured poet of the evening. I'm so proud to introduce Michael Rather. He drove all the way from Texas to be with us tonight, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Michael Rather Jr. has had his poems published in the Concho River Review, Borderlands, a Texas poetry review, by Yellow Flag Press, Flyways, and Reed. His collection, Variations on a Sacred Grove, was recently a finalist in the 2016 Orison Book Prize competition. He teaches composition, creative writing, and literature at Lamar State College in Orange, Texas. Please help me welcome Michael Rather.
I'm supposing the tall microphone's for me. See if that works. Can y'all hear me fine? All right. So what I'm going to read to you from tonight is actually Variations on a Sacred Grove, the finalist for the Horizon Book Prize, one of the finalists. I'm going to read as much as I can in 20 minutes. It's a collection of sonnets, so each poem is not that long. So you should not get bored easily, hopefully. And they're non-traditional sonnets, so the rhyme schemes are a little different. So Variations on a Sacred Grove. They must have knelt on opposite sides of the mattress, felt the feathers separate under the loosely sewn cloth as they prayed. My father and mother were caught in the heat that causes cotton to stick to chests, the heat that swells and rises with the rhythm of breath. And how long father and mother must have knelt and waited and prayed for enough light to fill the room, to see their skin glistening and wet as a body after it steps from baptismal water. Touch was not enough knowledge for them. They needed to see bristle on face, to taste salt on eyebrow, to smell meat on tongue. Father and mother needed to see the grips gouge on the other's skin to know that this was a beginning, to know this was like a moment, like being cast out of the garden. Our mother pulls us through the startled dust, stands us in a crowd in front of preachers. Around us, women's chests rise and men cuss. The black-clad preacher raises arms and reaches for heaven. He claims to reach up and grab God by his foot. At times, in the pitched tents gathered round, the men and the women are near madness. They fume and froth, bodies heat pent up from the presses of their solemn prayers. The mothers' hallelujahs and spit sprays dampen their yellowing blouses. They swear they hear God's voice and that the preacher's touch will heal. He has been sent, his rough palm pressed to corsets, a much prophesied balm. The voices fall upon me again, with bladed tongues that run against their teeth. The voices chorus a grind of bone saws and caliper fingers that force open my mouth to let loose words. Millions of words, bled from tongue, from lips, and the words they pour out until the very air tastes sour with alkaline spit. The voices' laughter is cicadic, perpetual, constant. The voices fall upon me once again with sanded lips raised in snarls. They are bent to suck the spirit into the open air where it will feel the growing blackness of light, where it will do what it is asked. Beetle pupils swell, perpetually red, halo iris fist-sized and yellow-tiered. The abscess winks, another eye for God, to see sticks shake in our hands over sod, as we water which the fields desperate to pay the lancing fee. Can he ferret out our drowsing, the smallness of our faith? The eye is warming, its soft worm lashes react to each hobble, each shift of wool trousers across separating skin's leg. The new eye's room, a puckered bluing scab, interlacing the veins as gold the soil. At least that is what my father has claimed when he answered, calling upon God's name. Will you be bound? Surgeons ask and tap my swollen shin and splinter the skin to leach out the infection. The leather straps snap in calloused hands while others reach into cowhide and pigskin bags. Their fingers pull out glass whiskey jars and worn scalpels. They place them lovingly on the pine dresser, line the bright metal tools on the wool. blanket mother spread to protect the wood. When the surgeons began to pour the whiskey, I said, not a drop of Satan's blood. No whiskey, not one particle, no stupor. I will fill every second of that blade. I will know every layer of flesh you raise. Rot blooms in rust-colored tree trunks, tree husks, and threads itself into splintered timber. Sparse grass grows, bones are scattered among the dust and dirt. In the dust the Spirit walks, its eye on me. I hear him say that this is a desolate world, fatherless and empty. My feet are brown with dust, and I am unsure of my steps. The inhalation of my breath is slow. The air weighs on my chest. Worms slide from under bark while they're white illuminating the dark. The Spirit points to the horizon and says, not all deserts are barren. My shins are dirt covered. My hands tighten round piles of leaves. These trees rise round, clothed in woolen bark and silver lichen. Stained glass sky, branches flux and foil, and kaleidoscopic light strikes the ground, whose green intersects the red soil. The cathedral of helixes of dust motes that are caught in beams of eye-width light is where I wait to be lifted beyond this ground, lifted bodily through the hushed leaves. It is for this my soul I do dight, with hours here, pine needle on, knees press the dirt. Here a quiet voice speaks between the croaks and mutters of birds' beaks. I am surprised your pale lips lack froth at their edges, that you come to me clean. You claim that Jesus and Elohim appeared in temporal cloth before you. You lie. We know from Scripture Father and Son are one and the same, joined at the root, revealed in the flower that becomes the fruit. And what of his name? Did he not use the Hebrew or the Greek? You do not know Aramaic, Latin. Repetitions are all that you can speak. All this you most likely had imagined. God does not appear in these later days. He leaves his work to men, not mystic saints. It is night, but noonday light fills my room. Within the corneal glow, feet float free from the earth. A shadow carpel whose bloom matches the leaf fires quietly speaks. Your labors have only begun. You must rise a voice in the grove. You will be the refiner's fire and the fuller's soap. You will place stones before eyes and through them untangle feet from the mire. Purify the people until rendered down to gold and silver, down to the spirit essence. The words must be made. Untangle the sentences long made bramble and bracken and bold. For words are pollen stored on bees' hind legs, carried from ear to ear in the last days. At her frayed hem I kneel and see the threads hover barely above boards, so much like his feet not touching the floor. I pray with her. She says all she can think, verse upon verse, repeat. Malachi, Isaiah, Acts, calls upon Elijah the prophet, calls upon saints. What shall my son do? Shall he lift to his lips that golden trumpet, call down upon him the wrath of ignominy? What shall we do? We cannot eat gold. We cannot make the people believe. Show us a sign, O Lord. We work your will. The lines etched in gold my son has followed. We have not forgot, but we do not know. No one knows the text you wish writ, the words you once set. Faith is like a forest whose trees bend under their branches' weight. The forest vines tangle and encase trees' brittle bark. Faith is like these twigs that jut up from the dry ground. It will twist and wind. It will shape itself to the snow, and by the gales it is meld. As faith grows, it makes a subtle sound, like unto the withdrawing of the skin from bone as we age. The skein of muscles, soft tendons coil between the pure frame of skeleton. The words are written on these bones that hold the body together. The words unfold like trees' flower. Would you sow if you did not know you reap? Uncertainty is a demon, worse than any sulfur-skinned, scaled, and suit beast. Fear not such things. I will show it is all false. These words written about fire are mere children's wails into the ether. They are 1,000 echoes sounded from vain mouths into stone ears. Forget sin. It is vanity to believe these men whose black sleeves hide their cards. It is apostasy to ignore the trumpet's call, the cheer of millions upon millions of souls whose voices are challenging the sea. Even what is sacred is black without light, enmeshed in night, wound tight around the mind, impossible to decipher, the endless lines the ancient cipher. I cannot read the shapes or the signs, so I begin to untie my thoughts. I begin with what I know, a time when the holy seat was caught up in anger, had denied he and him, and those sprawled masses were hungry for wealth, bent from the lashes of their own greed and sins. There are few, a father and his sons, who kept the covenant with the one. How do you get a child to eat what he will not eat? Do you hold his chin and forehead between palms and force his jaw open? Do you compose psalms to apple and bread and meat? Is not truth like a meal well prepared and set before a child? He does not like the look of it. He does not appreciate the cook's work. No, he cannot see how it will fill him because it may not be well wrought. It may be of a brown hue, its sauce thick and rich and seemingly bland. The child will not lift his hand and partake. Truth without beauty is like a beach without the sea. The two stones marked with inscriptions, one black, the other white. They glow when I stare at them long enough. They show me my tale, the silver sword in the mansion waiting for the hands of a prophet. The youngest of his house, he will rise among the populace and act as God's voice on earth. In a new world, perhaps the one I inhabit, he will store up treasures and artifacts, fine works for us to find under mountains and grasses, that one day a whole new tribe will cross, bearing the doctrine and covenants across the empty sea of chaff, placing a new ark in a stone temple's heart. In autumn we pile the leaves and needles, the rotted twigs, the world that is not fit for use. We stand aside from the mound of refuse and take swigs from flasks. A man among us is tasked with the lighting. He raises a brand and tosses it among the dry kindling, and in time we bask in orange and red glows. The dead turn to ethereal roses. Are these thorns not like those that pierce the Savior's brow? Their burn temporary, the blood and bruised blossoms born from an earthly crown are soon forgotten. Soon ash swirling in a winter's gale, rising in thermals to join the stars pale. Your world is green-clothed flame, rich with God's gardens. Your people have not seen the fullness of the seed's harvest. God's hands are blackened to the wrists, pushed deep into the mother's womb. He works through you. Even a barren woman can be made a garden. He need only breathe upon her, and shoot will spring from her navel, her body a seed for the new soul. These are the wonders of which we sing, how emptiness was filled by the voice that tills. Adam, before his fall, knew how many ribs hung from his spine. He understood the winding branches that floated on silver creeks. He was built to love all things. Heavenly Father marked his son's back and arms, cut grooves and hash marks for each marriage, left the fingers for last. Heavenly Father cut into Adam's chest, lifted from the cavern fat and clay for a marriage. From the warm red mass he carved the first breast. Heavenly Father dipped his nail in warming blood and carved a ring around the knuckles' crux. My mind has been a ripened fruit, only waiting on a hand to lift to it and unwind the globe from its stem, feet to stand under the bough, and a face to look up to it, an ear to hear the pulse of juice through its orb. It has waited for tongue to taste and teeth to bite. It waits to open and for its seeds to be cut from its meat and placed in light. They wait deep within the skin, below the skull and the gray matter. They wait for the day. A pillar of fire speaks to an old man. It has no mouth, no tongue, no teeth, yet it speaks of outer darkness, of heaven, and the old man is filled with belief. And smacking his gums and shaking his head, he walks without fear into the mass of the unclean and the not seen. He says they will soon feel the lash of the Lord. All their works will come to naught, and on the waves of anger he is caught, up and lifted as though he were an angel, girt with a sword and a bugle, announcing the end of days, singing of burnings and beginnings. All for a dream, A still small voice in the ear whispering, leave your gold and precious things. A fever in the night that calls his house to order what they might and depart, for an angel of death crouches on the hill and watches his heart and knows his weakness. A warning to flee into the wilderness, to give up stone and metal, to start in the night when none might hesitate. For a grave fate has fallen on him and his children. They have learned what it is to know the fields burn. I think that's all I will read for tonight. That's about 20 poems, so hope you enjoyed them. Thank you. Thank you.